Hi, my name is Tubney Wright, and this is an episode of Luring Behind the Scenes. Today we are going to talk about life rights. Life rights are what you acquire in order to tell someone's life story or a portion of their life story, which would be an event. You don't need life rights to tell someone's story in the form of a book or a television series or a documentary or a movie. But if you don't get their life rights, you're gonna run into issues because they are probably going to dispute your vision of the story. And this happens not all the time because in most cases people acquire life rights, but there is nothing blocking you from creating a medium with someone's story without acquiring their life rights. So I want to get that out right away. You do not need to acquire life rights in order to proceed in telling someone's story. It's just a best practice. You want to acquire life rights so that the person doesn't come back and sue you, because when you're creating something, you're going to use your vision of their story and they may not agree with that vision, and it can leave you open to liability, like we've talked about in previous episodes, defamation, privacy right. Best practice, it's great to acquire life rights. So I played that Drake clip, if we talk in joints, it's just me and David Foster, because David Foster recently had this documentary film come out called Off the Record with David Foster, something like that. In the beginning, like the very first thing you see in the documentary, David Foster is saying basically like, you think you run this, but I'm gonna be breathing down your neck and checking you every step of the way. So basically he's telling the director, and the director who is also the producer, that he is going to control the narrative, which is like really humorous because he's not a producer on the film. So he really can't check him. So it is going to be the film producer and director's vision of the film, and he has some control, I guess, but not a lot. And I did listen to an interview with the director, and he was saying Foster is, in the music industry, a genius, a very talented person, and with that a lot of times comes an ego. So you see a lot of stuff online surrounding this documentary about his ego, and you can see from that just opening scene that he wants to control the narrative and his story, which I would want to control my story too, but then I'd become a producer on the film. So let's take a step back. When someone wants to create a documentary about someone else's life story, they enter into a life rights and a personal services agreement with the subject of the documentary so that you can disclaim liability, basically. The subject will grant you the right to produce the film, to distribute it, to publicize it, and to create your vision and execute it through the whole process. The agreement will also include compensation, what the subject is going to be paid by the producer for his life story. Sometimes that will include, they might have some equity in it and get royalties on a continuing basis. It might just be a flat fee that you just get paid once, and however well the film does, then you're not involved. There might be a bonus structure depending on how the film does, that you get a portion of the revenue. It will outline all that within the contract. It will also talk about copyright ownership, and like we talked about in previous episodes with reality TV, there will be some form of like a depiction release, basically saying, I am going to tell the story, and there's a pitch. So there'll be a pitch to the subject. This is how we're going to tell your story. But through the creative process, there will be decisions made by the director that the subject may not agree with, like I think what happened with David Foster. I saw in an interview that he tried to come back later and say like, oh wait, can we take that out? I didn't like that, I didn't like that, I didn't like that. And it's too late. You signed away your rights to tell the story by letting someone else be the producer on it, and you won't have a say. You will get a credit in it, but you won't be able to control the narrative, which I think is really funny that someone like David Foster, like, think of how many songs he has, how many contracts he's had to enter into. He had to really trust this director to tell his life story without becoming a producer on the film, which I think is amazing. So we are going to talk about the King Richard film that is slated for release in 2021. So if you haven't heard about this, Venus and Serena Williams' father has a movie coming out based on his life story, done by Will Smith. So Will Smith plays Richard Williams in the film. It's a Will Smith and Warner Brothers production. The movie was supposed to come out around this time, but COVID-19 happened, and now it's slated for a release in 2021. However, they faced a lawsuit for breach of contract based on an implied in fact contract that Richard had already sold the rights to his life story in 2014 for the book that came out about his life and about his raising of Venus and Serena. And so when I guess they found out that this movie was coming out, they sued Richard, his son, Warner Brothers, and Will Smith's production company, saying that there was a breach of contract, an implied contract, because they knew that this previous group had the rights to his life story. And despite knowing that, they entered into an agreement with Richard for $1 million to produce this biopic. So again, not a documentary, so I kind of lied in my thing. We're only talking about documentaries a little bit in case of David Foster. This is an actual movie where Will Smith is playing him. But the interesting thing is that this movie was already created. So they created a movie based on life rights that were already acquired by someone else years prior. They produced, developed, and created the movie. It was supposed to come out, so it's completely done a wrap, and are facing lawsuits based on it. So the suit ended up getting settled, but the court retained jurisdiction over the suit to make sure that Warner Brothers and Will Smith's production company pays the owners of the life rights for this implied breach of contract. So we don't know the settlement amount, but if you think if they paid Richard $1 million for his life story, how much is the settlement amount for a movie, a blockbuster movie with Will Smith and from Warner Brothers? I'd love to know how much they got on that. We might never know, but I thought that was interesting story. Whether it's a documentary or if it's a fictional depiction or based on a true story type film, the same underlying legal issues still exist. Who owns the rights to the story? Were those rights transferred? Was a license granted for the producers to create the film and execute the vision of the story of that person's life rights? 2, did they disclaim liability pertaining to the rights of the story? Meaning, who will be responsible if a suit arises out of this? And that's probably why Richard also got sued. And maybe he has to pay a portion of it. We don't know. He may have to pay a portion of the settlement that Warner Brothers and Will Smith entered into. I don't know. That might have been part of his contract. 3, who has the right to use derivative works of the piece that's executed? So like a book. If you create a book, what if that book gets adapted into a TV show? Who's going to own that? Does the subject get compensated for that? And then 4, you're waiving your right to sue for defamation, for invasion of privacy, etc. And then I think that's it, but we're gonna end with, I thought, really interesting fact that when you're doing life rights for someone who has already passed away, you have to look at the law in your state. California recognizes the right to publicity 70 years after someone's death. So you can still be sued if you're depicting someone's life story in a manner that may be inaccurate, maybe swayed, maybe not the way that the estate wants, and you can be sued for that, which I thought was really interesting, and I thought that was a fun fact to end on. So I hope you learned a lot about this. I think as Hollywood continues to develop new content, it feels like they're running out of material, quite honestly. Like, they're bringing back all these old shows. As they run out of content, they're really going to look to life stories as the sources of their content. And in that is a host of issues that we've discussed in this show, and the acquisition of the rights to portray that story. I think the best practice is always to get the life rights, get that agreement signed, have the person transfer their life rights, and have a really tight contract so that somebody's not coming later saying that they're creating a movie with the life rights that you had previously acquired for that person. And I would get broad life rights. So I would want a life right to be like, I want to depict you in a movie, a book, and a television show, because you just don't know how popular something will be. So at least for a time period, you want to lock down those rights. So even if it's a 12-month period, like, we have the right to create derivative works of your life story for this certain period, maybe a 2-year period. 12 months seems kind of short. But if it's a hot story, then you never know. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. I'm Tevney Wright. This is an episode of Luring Behind the Scenes. And I'll see you next time, which I think the next episode we're going to talk about Kanye's music contracts, because I just can't not talk about it. He posted all of his contracts on Twitter, and I know there's some good stuff in there about royalties and some of the things that we were talking about on previous episodes. So I can't wait to share that with you. Join me next time on Luring Behind the Scenes.